Hello. Welcome to Kindly Neurodivergent with Kay. This show is to spend quality time with each other, kindly discussing the similarities and wide range of differences we experience. The experiences we discuss on this show are for educational purposes only. Please do not substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Before we begin, I respectfully request that if you witness any pauses during this show, please continue watching. I'm composing a spontaneous comment or question, someone's processing their thoughts, in addition to repeating something that was unintelligible or misunderstood. It is natural discourse, and we can choose not to say anything while this is occurring. Today I have Krista, Wilbur, and Rebecca Thomas with me. They are going to talk about teaching, thinking, and talking about social skills in a way that is respectful of individuals. Krista Wilbur has 20 years of experience as a special education itinerant teacher, child development specialist, family and child therapist, and supervisor. She currently leads social groups specifically designed for children aged 2 to 6. When Krista's not working, she likes to spend time with her 2 kids, husband and cat, in addition to hiking, beaching, traveling, and vintage shopping. Rebecca Thomas has 18 years of experience as a teacher in public and private schools as well as Head Start, before becoming a special education itinerant teacher. When she's not working, Rebecca enjoys hiking with her husband, playing rock band in the garage with her nieces, and taking the dog on long walks in the woods. Welcome, Krista and Rebecca.
Thank you, Kayla. It's nice to be here.
Please introduce yourselves.
We're Becky. I'm Becky
I'm
and
Krista.
Krista, and we run a play group, the social skills groups, based in New York City. And we run classes for children ages 2 through, Krista, I think we go to 11 now.
Mhm.
And we have classes after school. Some classes happen in school, and classes happen on the weekends.
And I get to be the lucky person that is Becky, my business partner, that we do this together. So I'm lucky to be able to work with Becky in this way and do this fun work together.
I am the founder host of Kindly Neurodivergent with Kay. I am the office manager at Silver Speech, in addition to a co-host of the Inside Scoop of Living with Cerebral Palsy. I am a co-author of Living with Cerebral Palsy, led by Kyle Scott. I am a member of the State Student Disability Council as a student of State Community College. I am the communication assistant and a dedicated member of many committees for my therapeutic horseback riding program. As you see, I am a happy, motivated, and active, vibrant female with cerebral palsy and epilepsy who defied the odds. What are social skills?
That's a really good question. I think if we had asked people about this question a few years ago, we might have gotten different answers. But, to us at Playgroup, social skills are the skills that you use to be social. And so they don't need to look any one way. And so the way that we think about social skills is first, we want to get to know the individual and learn who the child is or the children that we're working with and how do they like to connect? How do they like to be social? And when we figure out how they like to be social, those are their social skills.
And I think it's important to us that we know everybody wants to be in community with other people, right? Like that people want to be connected and want to have friends and want to be able to be social. And we like to think about ways that each individual can be that social for them. So sometimes that might mean I'm social and I have one friend that I spend time with and all we do is talk about Pokemon, and that's a social skill and lovely and that's what people need. So uh, it's important to us that we know that all humans have that desire to be social and have the capacity for it.
I totally agree. My disabilities affect my motor skills. Please talk about the previous belief that being social was only one way.
Yeah, when people think and talk about teaching social skills to kids, that comes from a very neurotypically neuronormative focused lens, where the way that we developed this kind of collection of social skills was based on what neurotypical social connection looks like. So, right, like eye contact, um, talking on many topics, being flexible in a conversation. So many of these goals we were seeing come across on IEPs, the individualized education plans, and we were seeing them and we were thinking, okay, but how are these kids being social? So these were kind of some of the ways, and still this is still kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? Generalized way that people think about social skills. But I think we're starting to realize that we can be social in so many different ways.
How did this change become recognized?
It comes from disability advocates and really listening to the disability community. And previously, it was everyone listened to the like knowledgeable ones, the researchers, right? Like the people, and that's where those social skills, the neurotypical, the normative social skills came from. And as the disability movements, disability rights, all these things, as they come into stronger voices, that we can hear they're like, oh, hey, you can be social in many ways, right? The social skills look and feel and are embraced in many different ways. But it comes from listening to the disability advocates and then the disability community as a whole.
What is neurodivergent affirming?
Neurodivergent affirming to us means that when we are thinking about curriculum or what we're teaching and how we're supporting our children, that we're thinking about their brains and that we're understanding that all brains are different and how can we listen and learn from our children and meet them there and then support them there in a way that feels good and authentic to them. And I also do think that a part of being neurodivergent affirming is listening to the experts, listening to disability advocates. That's really, really important to us and for neurodivergent affirming practices.
How can social skills look different?
I, I mean, social skills can be whatever way two or more people interact, and it can look more than I can imagine. Like I can name some things but I also know that I haven't imagined them all that exist, right? A social skill is sitting in the same room with somebody and reading a book together. A social skill is um, sitting near to someone and uh, both playing a video game together. Like social skills are so many things. And they are also meeting somebody on the street and greeting a person that you know as you walk past them on the street. These are Becky, you probably have some others that you can think of.
I think it's such a good question, Kayla, because it's like unending. And I had such a big smile on my face when you asked that question because I can think about how much fun and how silly um, times our friends can have, our children can have when they're with their friends. And the other day there were children that were tracing maps together. And I think that that was the best social interaction that they'd had in a really long time. And I had a child that said to another kid, well, I just like to be really honest with my friends. And so I'll tell you, when your drawing doesn't look like it's supposed to look. And that was a social interaction that worked really well for those children. Um, my favorite example that I love to share about social interactions is we have a group of children who were really interested in trains, and they created this big train station called Green Goober Station. And it made no sense, and it still doesn't make any sense. And it was such a fun social interaction.
And any task is so complex no matter how you break it down into smaller ones.
Yes. Yes. Really good point.
Mm.
Such a good point. It's so much of the work that we do in our groups is breaking down these tasks into the bite size that kids can manage so that they can learn what they need to be social, right? So like the green goober trains didn't just emerge one day. It was lots of practice and like small steps to these big, loving, joyous connections. But it started with two kids playing trains right next to each other. So these like small steps, these small pieces to build into this joyous connection.
Does sensory affect social skills?
I think that's such a good question too, because if that's also such an individualized way to experience the world, right? How your sensory system interprets that information. And so we always try to have something available for children so that if that's the way that they need to connect and play, right? Our kinetic sand table is always full of kinetic sand. It has to be there. And sometimes we have access to big cushions and places where children can crash and bump and experience their bodies together. So yeah, the way that we experience the world through our sensory system is such an important way to be social.
I love the saying different is not wrong. How can we raise awareness about the importance of this?
I think that it's such an important thing to say and embody. And for me, it's doing the work that we do and really every day celebrating that difference is not wrong, right? That difference is something that we can embrace and share together, and that the difference is like you're you're really good at building the train tracks long, and you're really good at building a ramp with the tracks. And those are different skills that you have. And that's not wrong, right? Like that, and that you can, those two creative ways can come together to interact. Um, to like the big pieces of just celebrating that all brains are different and that we have space for everybody's brains in our groups. So,
We try to have these conversations with
Say
school.
that. It is sad that we even have to say that.
It is, and it's so important that we do. That's why we try to go into schools and talk with people about the work that we do and how important it is to listen to people. But I hope that there can be change from people listening, and hearing a different way of thinking.
your work is important.
Very.
Ditto. Due to speech difficulties, I am considered nonverbal, so I primarily communicate through sign language and technology like an augmentative and alternative communication (AAC) device. With immediate family and others that know my ways of communication well, I fingerspell, verbalize some letters and words, and of course use body language. What are other ways of communicating?
It's a good question. We have some children who are also Gestalt language communicators, and so sometimes they might speak in scripts and sounds that they're hearing. And then we also have some children that might not have access yet because we work with younger children to communicative devices. And so they may have books or images and pictures and some sign language. But we have been working with some more children who are Gestalt language learners recently.
And we communicate with all of our senses. You know, people rely so much on this verbal communication that the world is set up for this verbal communication, but we are communicating in so many, in the myriad of ways, just through all of our senses. So.
Mhm.
Oh, my journey to get a reliable voice was interesting.
Mhm.
I bet.
I
I
know.
bet.
Mhm.
How can friendships look?
Like anything, right? A friendship can look like, I actually just described this to some children yesterday who got into an argument over a game and then they started to play another game and then they got into an argument. And I explained to them that sometimes friendships can look like this and 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 like this. Friendships can look like however they need to look to make you feel good, right? And so sometimes that can be like we were saying before, sitting next to each other and reading a book, maybe adding a train track next to each other, maybe crashing into pillows together, maybe never saying a word to each other, but doing art next to each other. It can look like anything, as long as it feels good.
Friendship is there's like proximity, like being close to a person. So that means like you're in the same room, you're texting them, you're just connected in a way, right? Like friendship is connection. And usually it's over the shared interest or shared experience. So that's really, those are the usual things, but they could look in many different ways. But those are the two pieces of friendship that I think uh, are the thread that we can support and being like having some sort of connection, some sort of being together in a way. And what are the things that you share? So it might be that we both love Pokemon and we trade our Pokemon cards, or we are both really into disability justice and we are constantly texting or messaging each other about that, right? Like it just
How can play look?
plays everything.
Everything.
We're playing right now. We're just playing together, communicating. That's what, right? This is one kind of play. But play can look so many things, right? You can play with others, you can play by yourself, you can play with objects, you can play with thoughts in your mind, you can play with drawing on a paper. There's so many ways to play.
What is the difference between friendship and play?
That's a good question. I think friendship comes through play, right? Friendship doesn't happen immediately. We have to have some play interactions that feel good. And from there, that's where friendship can grow. And Krista, like you said, it can come from shared interest and play or through shared interest. And from that, that's where friendship develops. And I feel like friendship should feel good. It should feel good. And
Mm.
that's why your play and your social skills are so individualized. We can't really teach that because what feels good to any one person, we can't teach that.
And friendship isn't good all the time, as Becky just
Yeah.
said. Part of being friends is the ups and downs, and that's just being human and being right. Like we all have emotions, and that comes into our friendships. But the overall feeling is that good, that real happy, like
Mm.
uh,
Mm.
I have
internal.
experienced that.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, it's so human.
My play didn't always include the typical play skills due to the barriers I have. I always have tended to socialize with adults in addition to playing card and board games.
What are some card and board games that you like?
Mm. Mm.
Golf and dominoes. Yahtzee.
Love Yahtzee.
Just depends on motor skills.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice. There are a lot of games online too, right?
Mm.
Krista just taught me that Battleship was online. I love that game.
Mm.
What is the double empathy problem?
Yes, this is the problem that for so long the emphasis has been placed on the neurodivergent individual to make changes to fit in with neurotypical standards. And so the double empathy problem lies in the emphasis always being placed on the neurodivergent person. And now trying to shift things so that we can start to explain to neurotypical people and everybody the ways that people are social in many ways, something that I like to talk a lot about are special interests because some neurodivergent brains will like to info dump and talk about special interests, and that's the way that they like to say hello, how are you, rather than go through the niceties of hi, how are you. They want to start talking right away about something that they're really interested in, and that's their way of showing that they're caring. And
Mm.
instead of teaching them to stop doing that, which is such a that's amazing. That's awesome, right? We want to teach everybody that that's one way to communicate and that's one way to connect. There isn't a right or wrong way. And so the emphasis with the double empathy problem is to take all of that focus off of the neurodivergent individual and place it on everybody, that we all have to work to try to connect. We all have to work to try to understand and be social.
Please talk about how boundaries work.
Yeah, this is a big part of our work is thinking about boundaries, and I put it into the discussion around consent, right? Like boundaries and consent. This is all about supporting people and understanding what is their comfort level with something and being able to name it and then having a community be able to respect that. And so that's how consent, that's a boundary. Like, so, you know, a child might say, I need more space and that's my boundary and I'm going to put a tape line you cannot come play in my anymore in any further into my castle, and that's a boundary that within our groups that we help support and follow through and say that's the boundary for this kid, and as grown-ups we also have boundaries like we work in a very busy office and we can't scream. Like we really, it's too loud and it's too much for everybody in this space. And so that's one boundary that we work on is um we can't, that's one boundary that we have. But for me, it's always about boundaries are coming back to learning self-advocacy and how to advocate for ourselves and how to be in a supportive community where that's respected.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's so that we're practicing self-advocacy.
Or closing my door.
Closing your door, putting a stop sign. We have magnets sometimes that we'll use that say, I want to play alone or give me space. We're trying to really encourage children to set boundaries and advocate for yourself.
I should have one that I am in something professional.
Yes, that's a good boundary.
How do you teach boundaries?
So we use signs like that or tape. It depends on the age of the children that we're working with. One time I had a group of children where they loved farm animals and we made boundary barns and we had barns and whatever materials they wanted, they put in their barn and you couldn't go into their boundary barn. Yeah. And also, we love that boundary song.
But
I forget what it's called.
before we do the work, we really with the younger like with younger kids, really you have to learn to listen to yourself and trust
Mm,
yourself. And without that component, it's really hard to name a boundary. So you need to learn, oh, I love animals and I don't want anybody else to play with them.
mm,
I am a person that needs an hour to myself every day and need to go in my room and close the door, right? You need to learn about yourself and trust that. So that's a piece that comes first before we can get to this place of self-advocacy of around the boundaries and
mm.
How do you determine what age you?
This is not an age. This is where a person is. Um, I know I do some work with adults in some therapy world, and this is stuff that I'm working with the adults on, is learning to trust themselves, um, and being able to set boundaries in that way. So there's no age to start this, where it's when a person is ready and they can take those steps to and be responsive to the supports around getting that.
I mean, because you started 2 to 6.
Yeah.
In my groups, yeah, I start as young as two. In the groups that I started as young as two, but in my other work, I work with older kids, older people and older kids.
And we do start talking about boundaries as young as 2. Because if you think about a toddler, their whole world is boundaries.
No,
When are boundaries necessary?
Hmm. Well, in social interactions, they're necessary when you want to play and collaboratively play, especially, right? When you're in collaboration, boundaries are really important because we want to make sure that your ideas get to exist with others. And in order for your ideas to exist with others in collaborative play, you need to know that you get to say, no, I don't like that. Don't do that there. Don't put that there. Stop talking about Taylor Swift. You get to have your boundaries when you're collaborating. And I think that's really important.
How do you determine if you have too many boundaries?
That's a good question. That's a Krista question.
I if you have so many boundaries that it's causing you harm, right? If that
Mm,
you're not able to connect to others, then you have too many boundaries, that your desire to connect, that would be too many. But there's no number that's too many, because each person's level of comfort with interaction or needs are going to be different. And there's no way to say, you've got the right number, you've got the wrong number, because it's an individual. But if you have so many that you're not meeting your internal need of connection, then there's a piece of like, okay, let's figure out how to trust yourself more, how to trust
mm,
others, how to be safe with others. And that comes, one of our favorite things is this co-regulation, which we haven't talked about, but like being able to co-regulate and be with another person.
mm.
How do you read that in children who don't know?
Mm. That's a good question. I've worked with some children who have set up so many boundaries that it was difficult for them to enjoy being with other children. It was preventing them from, feeling their best selves with other kids around. And so I helped her to be aware of all of the boundaries that she was putting in place. validating, naming and repeating, writing down all of her rules. And when you would see all of the rules written down and it was covering a huge poster, it was like, ooh, that's a lot. And so, from there, we validate and then we also open up opportunities for things that people love. Because when you're doing something that you love, that's really motivating to push past a little bit of uncomfortability.
Please talk about self-confidence and mental health.
Yeah, I think this is that piece where I said like your self-trust, right? That you trust yourself. That is really important. And that's the self-confidence, right? So when you feel good about yourself, when you know yourself, that's when you're going to have the confidence. And that's where the mental health of like, I feel good, I can interact and um, be in the world in the way that's right for me.
Mm.
And we work on that so much in our groups of not just saying like, oh, you're an amazing person. Oh, that's not, we don't do that at all. We're like, what are you into? Who are you? What makes you tick? Like, who are you, little 3-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old, 11-year-old? Like, what's really, and we connect on that. That's what we love to do is connect over who the people are. And that supports that inner self-trust, that inner self-love, that inner self capacities.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Everyone knows about my horseback riding.
Because it's your favorite. It's so you love it.
20 years.
Wow. Kayla, that's amazing.
Therapeutic.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I was gonna say that's why you have those pictures there. Everywhere. That's your love.
And that's what, right? That's the mental health piece, right? Riding horses, not only do you love it, it like brings you the joy. And that's what brings you the self-confidence and all of the pieces come together when you doing what you love.
And physical activity.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
important.
What word or phrase should fading in be replaced with?
I love the phrase, all brains are different. That's it. Well, all brains are different. Is there such, I think that's so important. It helps us to understand what that means to fit in. Well, your brain is going to be different from theirs because all brains are different.
And we talk about how we have space for everybody.
Yes.
And so all brains are different and we have space for everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you know if a child feels like they belong?
Mm. They're smiling and laughing and wonder. Yeah. We always say there's like the gleam in the eye, right? That's like our floor time co-regulation, that gleam in a child's eye or a person's eye.
And I would use like all of my senses in this time. So when there's ease
Mm,
and presence, that's also there. I think
mm.
often we think like, oh, laughing and smiling and like, but that's just one way of expressing it. And so I want to be mindful that I use all of my senses to see another person to really know that they feel that.
Because sometimes flapping might be that we belong, right? Sometimes humming or stimming, that might feel like we belong. You're right, Chris. It's so many different things. It's the individual.
Mhm.
What if ease is not possible?
Mm,
Mm.
that's a good question.
I I don't know. I mean, for me, ease means a certain state. And I think that that state is accessible in many ways. It's not like mm, ease within everything, but like that ease of like that inner knowing, um, that inner calm. There's like a piece that
Mm.
like there's a that you connect to this inner calm, and that might an inner calm might look like jumping up and down and flapping, and an inner
Mm.
calm and an inner ease is one of intensity. I mean, I work with lots of kids whose emotions are quite intense, and it,
Comforting.
yeah,
Comforting, yeah.
yes,
Hmm.
comforting, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
How do you learn a child's preferences without pushing them while nudging them a little?
Mm. I think that's the floor time that we do, Chris. Would you say? Like, that's where we're jumping in and we're joining in on a child's play. And when we jump in and join in on a child's play, we kind of leave our judgment or any ideas back out of the door. And we're just experiencing with them what they're experiencing. And that from there, we can learn what they like, how they like to play. And that maybe the next day we come back in and we say, well, we want to try this. We want to work toward this goal. And so then we'll use that interest or whatever that play was that we experienced the day before or the hour before or 5 minutes before to work toward that goal.
I think it's so important to use play in these times. I'm thinking about just even the idea of there's like a little kid who's having a hard time saying goodbye to their grown up, and that makes them cry and they get really upset. And so maybe a goal is to help them be able to say goodbye with more ease, where it doesn't cause as much dysregulation for them. And we slowly nudge that through play, right? We take little stuffed animals and play out having the mommy leave and come back. And
What do you do if it is not floor time, especially if they only prefer floor?
Uh, so floor time that's the type of intervention that we use.
Ah,
It can happen on a table, it can happen on a vertical surface, it can happen in a chair. What it means is, but that's a very good point, that floor time shouldn't just be called floor time. That's a really, really good point because it is DIR, which stands for development individualization relationship. That's the approach, which is better than floor time because it doesn't have to happen on the floor. It can happen flying in the air, jumping. It can happen in a chair. It can happen on a vertical surface. That's a really good point that I never thought about.
I didn't know if you had limits.
No, Krista, I don't think so. What do you think? Unless somebody's uncomfortable, I think that our limit for playgroup is if a child is not comfortable being in a group yet. And that can happen. There can be children who aren't ready to be with other children yet because they don't feel comfortable. And they will tell us and show us, especially when we meet in the afternoon after school, you know. Some children have to work so hard to make it through their school
Mm.
day, and then being with a group of more children after school, it's too much. They're not comfortable. I think that would be our limit. We want people to feel comfortable
Or
and enjoy
aggression.
it. Or, well, with aggression, you know what? Sometimes we have some problem solving to do with aggression. But that is a good point because sometimes aggression can be when we feel uncomfortable.
Mm.
And so I don't know that aggression is like we don't really have a limit toward aggression because we want to work towards problem solving when that's happening. Where is this aggression coming from? Is it too loud? Is it too busy? Is there too much going on? What's happening? It makes us question and wonder and want to jump into play and see if we can kind of help that way.
And
But
we're comfortable with aggression. We can't let children or anybody hurt anybody else. So
Mm.
right.
there's like aggression that is harmful, and that's a boundary on our end. But aggression of like showing aggression because you're uncomfortable or showing aggression because you're
Mm.
expressing yourself is something that we value because it's giving us the information of saying, oh, this is an intensity for you that you need to show us, and that we use that as information.
Right.
Do you allow stimming?
Yes, of course. Of course. It's communication, it's stimming, it's stimming.
Mm. Yeah.
Please discuss parallel play.
I just saw some today that was so very exciting. And I think it fits in with the kind of like aggression. Maybe I'll put it aggressions like this. Um, we were playing within a little group, and the children were very loud. And if somebody had walked by the room, they would have thought, oh my gosh, those children are screaming at each other. They are yelling.
Mm.
They were playing. We were managing it. Had a store. We were making it controlled. Um, and then one child started building a goblin fire with candles, and they put a pot on top with poison noodles. And the child who had been screaming and yelling at him 30 seconds later came over, watched it, and then he took goblin fire and built goblin fire in a bowl and put poison noodles on top. And so they weren't really playing together because they were screaming at each other. They had two very different ideas, but they built the same thing. And after their parallel play, they kind of looked at each other and then went back to yelling about different things. But but they built those two beautiful things next to each other. They watched, they built. It was really, really cute.
I think people generally think parallel play is a individual process that you're on your own, you're playing by yourself. But parallel play, it's in parallel, meaning next to, and next to could mean on the other side of the room from each other. Next
Mm.
to does not have to be literally side by side.
Oh.
But that you're aware of the other person, the other player. That's what parallel play is, that you're playing and that you're aware of that other player. Um, and how that awareness looks is very different for that awareness is different for each kid. Sometimes it's being able to do a similar, like building the same material, and sometimes that parallel being aware of is humming the same song, right? Or like they say, I've had experiences where like a kid will be playing farm animals, and then a kid across the room starts humming Old MacDonald had a right,
Hmm.
like Old MacDonald, and that's parallel play, right? Like that is
Oh.
so
How do you help kids find themselves?
Hmm. I think by delighting in them, joining them in their joy.
it's being with, right? It's being with and fully being with, right? Like just as Becky said, taking all of your stuff and you just join somebody. Um, and that's how you learn to be, yeah.
Like we have been doing.
Exactly. And it feels so good and it feels so warm, right? That's us. That's how you find yourself. Connection.
How can you help kids learn self-advocacy?
Sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's harder. Sometimes some children aren't ready to advocate for their own ideas with others. And so I think first it's through connection, right? Showing that you're valued and you're valuable and we want to hear what you have to say. Um, and then we use a lot of problem solving language so that we get to hear everybody's ideas when there's a problem. That I think helps to promote some self-advocacy because, if somebody wants the spoon that somebody else has and the child says, I want that spoon, and the kid holding it says, okay, you can take it, and gives them the spoon, we don't get to check in usually to say, did you want to give that spoon away? Was that what you wanted to do? Did that fix the problem for you? And so, checking in on each party in an interaction like that is very helpful. And also just showing that we have everything that you say has value and we'll listen. If you don't want us to take out the scary castle, we are not taking out the scary castle. If you need us to take out the scary castle, we have to figure out how to problem solve with that because all of your self-advocacy matters.
How do you do that to in children who don't know?
Mm,
Hey, this is when the connection comes in, right? And so when children don't know what where they're like, do I want to give the spoon or not? You know, some of it is like connecting and giving them that, but also giving them permission of saying, you can keep it, right? Like
Mm.
you can. Um, and I think it's also work that we do all over is like, you can stim. If that's what if you want to, like, we have like a group time where we read a book together. And if a kid's body is walking or jumping, um, we name that and say, oh, your body is jumping and we're reading a book. Like that's helping you read the book right now. And that helps them advocate so that when they're in school and they're jumping, when somebody's reading a book, they say like, oh, it helps me listen to a book when I jump, right? Like
Mm.
we uplift what we see and help them advocate like this is what I need and this is what helps. So even if somebody doesn't know that the jumping is something that is helping them, we uplift it and say, oh, it helps you were listening when you're jumping. um yeah.
What would you tell people who can't accept that social skills can look different?
Mm.
just keep watching, try, listen to advocates, listen to self-advocates, listen to and watch. It's that this is tricky. This is the work. This is the big work, it feels like.
Yeah.
I would tell people to take every single factor into consideration. Even though I can't physically help someone, I care for them so much that I remind them about certain things. An example of this is don't forget to grab your purse and phone over here.
Yes, exactly. Consider all factors. Consider everything. Yeah.
Thank you, Krista and Rebecca, for doing this with me. It was great to have you on. Please share this talk show with your family, friends, clients, and colleagues. Everyone watching, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.